All right, what's up, ladies and germs? Welcome back to the show. We have a very special guest today, Steve Wohlberg. How you doing, Mr. Wohlberg?
I am good. How are you?
I'm great. I'm excited to have you on here. It's an
Thank
honor,
you.
really. When you guys emailed me, there was a big packet that was sent out, and I haven't got to read any of your books yet, but I went back and listened to your episode with Josh Monday. I listen to his show a couple times a week. I love Josh, and it was super interesting. So you've written like over 40 books, and you spoke at the Pentagon.
Yes, there was a room inside the Pentagon where I gave a talk. It was a Wednesday morning prayer breakfast, and the chaplain of the Pentagon, one of the chaplains, invited me. So we had quite an interesting time together, and I had about 45 minutes to give a Bible study on the Book of Revelation.
Oh, that's awesome. So, what was the context of it, though? I mean, you were just going over and explaining to people what it means to you, or how did that go about?
Yeah. So what happened was there are many chaplains in the Pentagon, and one of them at the time, this was in 2007. His name was Chaplain William Broom, and he decided to host a symposium of different speakers, well-known speakers about Bible prophecy, sharing their views. So somehow he found me, he heard about me, and so he reached out, sent me an email, and asked me if I wanted to come to the Pentagon and give a talk on any Bible prophecy topic that I would choose. And so I accepted the invitation. I prayed about it, and I decided to talk about the role of the United States in biblical prophecy. So I focused on one verse in Revelation chapter 13, verse 11, which I speak a lot about these days. And I attempted to build a case, and I think I did, a pretty solid case that America, which is now the greatest nation on earth, in spite of our problems, have the most powerful military, economy, and like I said, in spite of our problems, we are still number one on planet Earth. So I looked at one verse in the Book of Revelation and built my case that this verse is talking about our country. And I'd be happy to share those thoughts with you if you want to go there in a little bit. So
Yeah, yeah. Let's
that was
get
the
into it.
context. That was the context.
Okay. Um, yeah, a lot of these conspiracy shows that I interact with, a lot of them like to get into like the Book of Enoch and some of the other stuff that wasn't brought into the canon. What do you think about that? I know it's considered like Second Temple literature, and there was a verse in Matthew 25 towards the end. I've heard it said that Jesus was saying anything that was written in the Second Temple should not be considered. But it's kind of hard to. When I heard it, it made sense, but when I go back over it and read it, I can't really put it together. Have you ever heard anything about that?
Yes, and I've heard all kinds of things, and so let me just clarify to your audience that my background is secular Jewish. I grew up in a Jewish home in Southern California. I didn't read the Bible, didn't pray, didn't know anything about God, didn't go to church, didn't go to synagogue. When I got into my teen years, I just got involved with the wildlife. I was surrounded by Sunset Boulevard and Hollywood and a lot of things, the entertainment industry, and I got pulled into a wildlife. And then when I was 20 years old, I started reading the Bible. Somebody recommended I read the Bible. I was starting to search. And so I started reading the Bible, and it changed me. It changed my life, and I gave up my the alcohol, the drugs, the nightclubs, the wildlife, the cocaine, all the things that people did in the 70s. Gave all that up, and it was a whole new life for me. Went to college, studied the Bible, and eventually became a pastor and a teacher and a seminar speaker. And now I direct White Horse Media. And so as far as I'm a basic Bible believing Christian. I do believe in the Old Testament, the New Testament. I love the book of Revelation. I'm aware that there are other books out there that didn't make it, like you said, into the canon. You know, the book of Enoch, and there's Maccabees and Judith and quite a few books. They did work their way, some of them, into the Catholic Bible, but I have never accepted those books as fully inspired by God, like what we see in the Bible. I think that there's value in some of those books, but I don't take them as, every word is necessarily inspired. And so I look at a lot of different literature. I've done a lot of homework, a lot of reading, written a lot of books, been on a lot of shows, but my focus is the basic Old Testament, New Testament. In the Old Testament, the book of Daniel; in the New Testament, the book of Revelation. And this is really my field of study. And that's what I teach, and that's what I write about.
Yeah, Daniel kind of like coincides with Revelation from what I've heard.
It surely does. It's like a key that goes into a lock. So Daniel's the key, Revelation's the lock, and they both go together perfectly. So when you read the book of Daniel, it gives you a home base. And then when you go to the book of Revelation, it expands on what's in the book of Daniel and gives more detail about what's happening down the stream of time in the times that we're living in. Daniel refers to this time period as the time of the end. Paul talked about the last days. The book of Revelation uses similar language. The time is at hand. And I believe we're down near the closing of history. And I know you mentioned, so your title of your podcast is Conspiracy Soldiers Podcast. I guess one way for me to say this would be, I believe there is a conspiracy going on behind the scenes, which is controlling a lot of what's in this world. And it goes back to Lucifer. And that's what the Bible reveals, that there is an angel whose name used to be Lucifer, but he rebelled against God in heaven. He took a third of the angels with him, holy angels. They became evil angels. And his name was changed from Lucifer to Satan, which means the opposer or the adversary. And they were kicked out of heaven, and they came down here to this earth, which had just been created. And they seduced Eve at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and Eve ate the fruit, which she shouldn't have eaten from, which opened the door to the devil to come into her life. And then she offered the fruit to her husband. He ate it, and that's how evil entered humanity. And we've been involved with a war. In a war, we're in the middle of a war between good and evil. And a lot of what we see and hear in the media and all kinds of social media and in politics, I think that behind the scenes, and that's where we can get into the conspiracy. I don't believe in all conspiracies, but I think that there is an ultimate spiritual conspiracy where Lucifer and his fallen angels are trying to pull the wool over our eyes and to prevent us from understanding the goodness of God and his plan to save us from sin and to get us ready so we can return to heaven and basically take the place of Lucifer and his angels.
Okay. That is interesting. I believe that too. I think it's all about spiritual warfare,
That's right.
But do you think Satan has any interaction with God at all? Like for instance, people bring up the divine council, like in the book of Job. What do you think about that? Or was that something that happened before and now it's different?
Yes, I think that there was a time when Lucifer still had access in a limited degree to the councils of heaven. And you mentioned the book of Job. Job chapter 1 describes a meeting, a cosmic meeting that took place between with God and possibly representatives from other worlds. They're called the sons of God, and they came to meet with God. And then it says that Lucifer came into that meeting. Satan came into that meeting, and God looked at him and said, basically, what are you doing? What are you doing here? And or where have you come from? And Satan said, I've come from the earth, from walking up and down on it. So, and then the conflict had to do with God's servant Job. He said, have you seen my servant Job? Are you aware of Job? Job's living a righteous life, even in the world that you claim as your world. And so then there's, the whole drama between what happened to Job. But so, yes, I do believe that, Lucifer had access to the heavenly councils in a limited way a long time ago. But after the cross, when Jesus came down here, the Son of God, and died on the cross and said, it is finished, and then rose from the dead, at that point, the book of Revelation, chapter 12, basically says that Lucifer's influence and access was completely severed. So he's out, and he has no say anymore in the heavenly councils, because Jesus' death on the cross basically bought this world back. He paid the price for our sins. And so he is now the rightful owner of this world. So instead of Satan representing the planet before the Father, Jesus is representing the planet before the throne of God. He's what the book of Hebrews and Revelation refers to as our great high priest. He's our mediator up in the heavenly temple. He's interceding for us, and he's doing everything he can to appeal to our hearts by the Holy Spirit to join him and to be on his side and to renounce the devil. And so that's a true biblical conspiracy that the devil is involved in, trying to convince us of all kinds of things. There's a famous saying that one of the devil's greatest deception is to convince humanity that there is no devil. So that's, part of his deceptions. And he's got a lot of deceptions, and a lot of what we see happening in the world through our visible eyes, the real story, or at least the root of the story, is what's happening behind the scenes.
Right. Oh yeah, it's pretty clear that there's evil in this world. I mean, all you gotta do is watch the news. There's some
That's
pretty
right.
crazy stuff going on.
That's right. And what we see in the visible world, the battle between good and evil in the visible world, is a reflection of the battle that's going on in the invisible world between Satan and his angels, and God and his angels, and the Holy Spirit and the power of Jesus. And we're all in the middle of this battle. We can't avoid it. It's not going to go on forever. There's going to come a time when God's finally going to say, it's done, it's over, time to drop the curtain. And when that time comes, everybody's on one side or the other. And this is our opportunity, our window of opportunity while we're alive, to make sure that we're on the right side, not on the wrong side.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, myself, I was a lot like, our story's a lot the same. I mean, I'm not as nearly as far along as you, but it took me till I'm in my 50s now, and I just got saved like a year and a half. But I started reading the Bible right about the same age as you, because the chaplain gave it to me when I was in the Army overseas. And I started reading, most people think you're supposed to read a book from the beginning to the end. And so I started reading Genesis, and then I would get to the part where like they were giving all the dimensions of the ark, and it seemed like it went on for pages and pages, and I would lose interest. And a lot of the genealogy, I realize now that it really is important, but at the time I thought it wasn't. So, I would lose interest during that, the genealogy part. And so it took me to, my wife invited me to a Bible study, and the lady that was running it, she said, you got to read the Gospels first. And that changed, for me, that changed everything.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people might be going about it wrong. Like I said, a lot of people just think you're supposed to start at the beginning and go all the way to the end. But that didn't work for me.
Yeah, well, that's the way most people read a book, but the Bible's a different kind of book. It's a unique book. It's actually the world's all-time best-selling book. Never been a book like the Bible. And when I started reading the Bible, I didn't start at the beginning. I looked at the table of contents and I saw a funny name, which was Ecclesiastes. And I thought, I wonder what that book is about. So that was the first book of the Bible I ever read, which was not difficult to understand. There wasn't a lot of genealogy and all the measurements of the ark and those things. And I read that book and it really got me going. And then somebody gave me a copy of a book on the life of Jesus it was called The Desire of Ages, that Jesus is the desire of all the ages. And so I read that book very early on. And that book was just all about his life. You know, him being born in Bethlehem, coming down from heaven, being born in Bethlehem as a human and living a life on earth and all the things he did, the miracles, the healings, the love that he showed, raising people from the dead, opening the eyes of the blind, healing cripples, and how he related to people just drew me. And then finally, I saw him as I read the book, in the Garden of Gethsemane, suffering for the sins of the world, and then hanging on the cross for the sins of the world, basically experiencing the punishment that we deserve because of sin. But he bore that. He bore that punishment because he loves us. So it was like a combination of justice. The justice of God wouldn't let sin, off the hook, but his justice was implemented on the cross because of his love for us. So the justice and the mercy centered in this man suffering on this cross and then rising from the dead. I'd never seen anything like that in my life. And it just drew me, and I decided I want Jesus in my life. I've got a lot of problems. I'm hooked on many drugs and things like that, addictions, and I need help. So I said, Lord, help me, come into my life and help me, forgive me, and get me out of these things. And that was the beginning. And I experienced for sure his power that changed me. And he's been continuing to change me for 48 years. And so it's only actually been last year, my wife and I got parallel Bibles, where it's one of those Bibles that you read chronologically. And so we did this together, and that was the first time that I've actually read the entire Bible from beginning to end. But most of the time, I just pick books that I'm interested in. And as I mentioned, the book of Revelation has become my favorite book, and I've been studying it for many years.
Yeah, I got a lot of, I like the book of James a lot, because he's kind of take no crap. You know what I mean? I just kind of like the way he lays things down. I mean, I like it all, but I've been doing this podcast for like 4 years now, and there was a time, I've talked trash about Constantine, and I even talked trash about Paul before, because something in Romans 13 about obeying the government, and I just couldn't understand why he would write that. And then, but God told me, I started reading things shortly after that explained it all.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I'm ashamed of some of the stuff I've said. He was a martyr. He died. I mean, he would never submit and give up Jesus. And I've changed so much in the past 3 or 4 years. It's crazy. And then I thought about going back and deleting some of that stuff, and I'm like, no, I'll just leave it there so people can understand that I've been changed.
Yeah, it's similar with me. He has changed me too, and he keeps changing me because there's many things that I've said in my life, a lot of things, but as the Holy Spirit convicts me that I shouldn't have done this or said that or taken the wrong fork in the road, then I confess that, I acknowledge it, I say, I'm sorry, Lord, and forgive me and help me to be a better man.
Yeah.
Help me to be a better husband to my wife. Help me to be a better dad to my kids, my 2 children. And he keeps on working with me. But, the Bible's pretty clear that God wants to transform our lives, purify our lives, cleanse us, and help us to be more like Jesus, who's the model man. His character is perfect. And that's God's plan, is to get us out of sin, away from Satan and his deceptions and delusions and his wicked character of pride and arrogance and hatred and murder, and transform us to come back into the image of God, which was his original plan. God made us in his own image. And now, unfortunately, too many of us, we reflect the devil's image. We reflect his character. And the whole purpose of the plan of salvation is to help us to change sides. And only God can do that by his grace, because we can't do it by ourselves, but we have to make a choice that we want him to come in. And if we do that, he will. I've experienced it. It's very real.
Yeah. Another thing that some of these conspiracy shows been getting into is like, there's a lot of talk about like Nephilim, and matter of fact, I was listening to this guy, Timothy Alberino, was on Rogan the other day, and he was saying that they're still around, some of these Nephilim. Do you ever get into that subject?
Not a lot. I mean, I'm familiar with that. In Genesis, it talks about the Nephilim, the giants. There were giants in those days before the flood, and I'm sure there were. Some people think that they were demons, or they were a creation of the devil. I think people were very much taller than they are today. Back in the days of Noah, they were bigger, they were taller, they were smarter. And so, and there are some tall people in the world today that, play basketball. They're, big names, they're very tall, but I don't think that the Nephilim are still wandering around right now. We've shrunk in size from the days of Noah. We've just been disintegrating, and now I believe we're the last or the second to the last generation, and we're weak. Humans are weak, and the devil's still out there. He's still doing what he's been doing, but he knows he's running out of time. And that's another reason why I like Revelation. Revelation chapter 12 describes the war in heaven, the original war, and Satan being cast out. And it describes what happened on the cross, where Satan completely lost his influence. And then it says near the end of the chapter that Satan has come down with great wrath because he knows he has a short time. And then the last verse of Revelation 12 describes a remnant, that God's going to have a remnant of final people who keep the commandments of God, which is the 10 commandments, and who follow Jesus Christ, who have the testimony of Jesus Christ. And that's what I want to be. I want to be one of the true followers of Jesus at the end of time, who keeps God's law, not because the law saves us, but Jesus' grace saves us, but he transforms us so we can live different lives, godly lives. And I've read the 10 commandments. I know them. I know every word. I've memorized them. I teach them in my seminars. I write about them in my books. And I believe that those 10 commandments give us what's right and what's wrong in this sinful world. And it's a wonderful law. And that by keeping the commandments through God's power, his transforming power, then that's the only way we're really going to be happy. People are looking, as the old song says, looking for love in all the wrong places. They're trying to find happiness in drugs and sex and money and power. But there really is no happiness in the ways of sin. Happiness comes from surrendering to God and doing his will, which is the way we were designed. We were created to do that. And only when we return to our maker and his plan for us are we ever really going to find satisfaction.
Yeah, I agree. Going back to, I was talking about Romans 13, and it's not just Romans 13. The book of Titus. There's several passages and they're basically telling you like, just don't cause trouble, just obey the leaders and the government. And it's like, does it leave room for like common sense? Like for instance, we're talking about I don't know how you feel about COVID and all the stuff that we went through with that, and a lot of the foods being poisoned. You got the FDA, the World Health Organization. Like, how do we know what to believe and what to, when we're supposed to question something? I'm going by these books in the Bible.
Yeah, I hear you. That's a great question. Romans 13, at least a good portion of the chapter, is about the role of civil authorities. And so when Paul says, submit yourself to the governing powers, he's talking about submission to the civil authorities who have laid down basically certain fundamental principles of what's right and wrong, such as, don't murder, don't steal, things like this. So if you look at the Ten Commandments, the Ten Commandments has two tables of stone. One table contains the first four commandments that have to do with our relationship with God. And the first commandment says, you shall have no other gods before me. The second one says, don't have any idols. The third one says, don't take God's name in vain. And the fourth commandment is about remembering the Sabbath day and keeping it holy. So those commandments have to do with our relationship with God. But then the last six are on the second table, and they have to do with our relationship with our fellow men. And that's where it talks about. So the fifth commandment is honor your father and mother. Number 6 is don't murder. Number 7 is don't commit adultery. Number 8 is don't steal. Number 9 is don't bear false witness, don't lie. And number 10 is covetousness. And if you really do a deep dive into history, into scripture, we find out that the role of civil government is to enforce certain parts of the second table, like murder and stealing. It doesn't have the right to enforce everything, but there's a domain that is legitimate for civil government. And when you read Romans 13, Paul quotes from the second table of the law. And he says, basically, if you do these things, you don't have anything to fear from government. But if you do evil, if you murder and if you steal and if you're doing things that are wrong, then the government's going to come after you with the sword of the law, and you're going to be punished. But it's not telling us that we need to believe or accept everything that every governmental agency has to say. That's where reason, common sense, research comes in. And we do need, we need to make decisions. We just don't want to get in trouble with the civil government by doing things that are openly wrong. But it says in the book of Acts, chapter 5, verse 29, where the government of the Jews was telling the early disciples, Peter and John, that they couldn't go around preaching about Jesus. The Sanhedrin, the Jewish Sanhedrin, said, don't do that. And so then Peter responded and he said, we have to obey God rather than men. And so when civil government commands us to do something that's wrong, that's against our conscience, that's against the Bible, then we draw a line and we say, I don't do that. I can't do that. So Romans 13 is not about submitting to every single thing that the government happens to say. And as I read Revelation, I mentioned, and maybe I'll just give you a quick little, I want to mention my position on American prophecy, and we could talk about this for an hour. So I'm just going to give you the short version.
Okay.
In Revelation chapter 13, verse 11, John says, I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon. And I've written a little book called The United States in Bible Prophecy about this verse. And if you study Daniel and Revelation, beasts represent nations, mighty nations. And so John sees a mighty nation. It comes up. Coming up in the Greek means growing gradually like a plant. It comes out of the earth, which represents more of a wilderness area. He has two horns like a lamb, representing a separation of power. And the lamb is a symbol of Jesus. And one thing Jesus did when he was on earth, he taught, he said, give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's and give to God the things that are God's. And that's the basis of the United States Constitution. Our First Amendment rights say that Congress or government is not to pass a law to establish religion or to prohibit the free exercise thereof. And that is the principle of the Lamb. That government is not to enforce religion like has happened in the past, neither is it to prohibit the free exercise thereof. And the only government ever formed in the history of the world that's based on that principle is the United States of America. So we are a mighty nation. We grew up gradually like a plant in a wilderness area, the New World. People came over from England and Holland and Europe to get over here looking for religious freedom because it hadn't been made available to them during the Dark Ages. And there's a lot of history behind this. And they came and eventually, they set up colonies, British colonies. And it's a long story how we eventually developed our Constitution through Madison and Jefferson and the founding fathers, the Constitutional Convention. And that Constitution basically is based on Jesus' principle, the principles of the Lamb, that government does not have the right to enforce religion or prohibit the free exercise thereof. But the prophecy ends, or at least verse 11 ends with eventually he will speak like a dragon, which means that the United States government is going to deny the freedoms that we have been given through the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, and they're going to use force. And that force, as you read the end of the chapter, it takes the form of what's called the mark of the beast, that nobody will be able to buy or sell unless he has the mark of the beast. And so that's when government overreaches itself. And we're not to obey the government when it does that, when it enforces the mark. And I have another book in my repertoire, which is called The Light at the End. And this book goes into just about every verse in Revelation 13 and explains not just the role of America, but what's coming in the future and the enforcement of the mark. And it's alerting us and warning us, giving us a heads up. We don't follow everything the government says, especially when it's forcing us to do something that's against God.
Right.
And so we need to have the principle. So back to Romans 13. Romans 13 is about submitting to the civil authorities when it comes to the second table of the law, which has to do with how we relate to our fellow man. Don't murder and don't steal. But it has nothing to do with the first table. And the book of Revelation warns us that this is the ultimate direction that our government is going to go. And that's where they're going to be restricting freedom. So you look at the First Amendment, it says, Congress shall not make a law to establish religion or to prohibit the free exercise thereof, or freedom of speech, or freedom of the press, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble. And if you look at the last, so many years, it's pretty clear that our freedom of speech, our freedom of the press, our freedom of worship, these are being slowly undermined.
Yep.
And these are the issues that I teach and I do interviews about. I talked about this at the Pentagon when I had my Bible study with a group in 2007. That's what White Horse Media teaches about. Which is the ministry I work for. And that's what my books teach, helping people to be educated about these issues.
Oh, that's good. What I'm hearing you say about the beast in Revelation, so it's a country or a power, principality, a nation. Okay. And how does that relate to the Antichrist?
Yeah, great question. There's, this is a lot of information, but in Revelation chapter 13, there's actually two beasts. There's
Right.
one beast in the first half of the chapter. There's a beast that comes from the sea, which has 7 heads and 10 horns. He has a big mouth. He makes war on the people of God. And then in verse 11, there's another beast that comes up out of the earth with the 2 horns like a lamb. And I've done a deep dive into this. And if you go back, if you rewind a couple hundred years, you go back to Europe, you'll get to the time of the Protestant Reformation, which rose up in Europe through people like Martin Luther and John Wesley and John Calvin and a whole bunch of other people. And they basically started reading their Bible because now Bibles were being printed for the first time through the Gutenberg press. And as they're reading their Bibles, they realized that the church that was ruling Europe, which was the Roman Catholic Church, the papal power, that it was not really following the Bible. It had brought a lot of traditions in. And so they tried at first to reform the church and get the church back to the Bible. And then the church started fighting them and persecuting them and killing them. So they studied more and they realized that prophecy predicts this antichrist power, the first beast that would have a big mouth and it would make war on the people of God. It would not respect religious freedom. And so they pretty much unanimously, Joe, and I can prove this, my books prove this, they pretty much unanimously believe that the Roman church, not all the people in the church, but the church system that was forcing them to follow the Pope or die, that this was the Antichrist system, the beast of Revelation 13. And then the second beast comes up out of the earth, and this beast has the 2 horns separating government and religion, the principles of Protestantism and republicanism, and it established a constitution and a Bill of Rights that gave people freedom. So you have the first beast was the Roman church that forced people, or they killed you, they martyred you, they turned you over to the Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition, etc. And then you have America rises up in the context of the quest for freedom. And that's really what happened. But then it says that America is eventually going to deny its principles, the principles of the Lamb. It's going to speak like the dragon, and that America is going to follow suit and go along with the principles of the Roman Church. And
So
that brings. No, go on. Sorry.
Are we talking about the Vatican, or is that something
Yes,
different?
that's right. We're talking about the Vatican. So today, most prophecy teachers are focusing on what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening with Israel, Jerusalem, the Jews, but they are ignoring Revelation 13, and they don't see the role of the Vatican and the United States. And this is where my field of research has been. And I believe there's a lot of good Catholics in this world. I'm not against, Catholic people, but the system of Catholicism is completely contrary to the principles of the United States Constitution and the First Amendment. And we're going in a direction. President Trump has not long ago, he formed a religious liberty commission, and they just issued their draft to the public. And when you look at the report of this commission, they're basically moving away from the Constitution, denying the legitimate separation of government and religion, and they're moving in the direction that is leading us really back to the papal power. And most Americans don't see it. If you look at our government, look at Congress and the Senate, there's a large percentage of Catholics. Look at our Supreme Court makeup. There used to be, now there's no Protestants on the Supreme Court. The majority of the 6 to 9 United States Supreme Court justices are from the Church of Rome. And that doesn't mean they're all going to do the wrong thing, but you look at the trend, you look at our society. So now we have a vice president who's J.D. Vance. He just came out with his new book called Communion, where he talks about in his book that he's in favor of blue laws, which basically go back to the old colonial Sunday laws. And he basically says that the state should be enforcing Sunday legislation in America, which is really a Catholic principle. And here's our vice president teaching this. And Trump's Religious Liberty Committee is moving in that direction as well, of getting rid of the separation of church and state. And so you look at the big picture and look at history, and there's a lot going on in our government, in the religious world, where Americans have forgotten. We don't know our own history. We don't know the history of Europe, the history of England, the history of the colonies, where the Massachusetts Bay Colony forced people. They had blue laws, and they also had laws about baptizing babies. And if you were living in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and if you didn't go to church so many Sundays in a row, or you didn't baptize your baby, you could be whipped, beaten, fined, banished from the colony. And if you came back, they'll execute you. And that whole context in colonial America, and the blood of so many Americans, especially Baptists, who were persecuted because they didn't believe in infant baptism, that raised the consciousness of Americans to eventually, in the time of the Revolution against England, we separated with the Declaration of Independence, and then we have a new government with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, they championed the cause of religious freedom, denying the role of government the legitimacy of enforcing religion or prohibiting its free exercise. And they didn't do this because they were liberals. They did this because they were trying to stop the religious tyranny and persecution that had been going on American soil and back to English soil, and also back to Europe and the Dark Ages. And this is the whole context of where we got our freedom. So we just celebrated 250 years of freedom from July 4, 1776 to July 4, 2026. And I've done a deep dive into all this, and I appreciate the freedoms that we have in our country. And I am not in favor of forced religion in any way. And I believe that God has given us freedom in this country so that we can worship him and follow him according to our conscience, and not be forced to do certain things that are wrong.
Right. Are you familiar with Peter Thiel?
I've heard his name. If you fill me in a little bit.
He's like a billionaire. He basically funded J.D. Vance's political career. And he's a gay man, not that it matters, but he's been going around giving seminars about the Antichrist, and going back to
Yes, I have heard of him. Now I'm remembering what I have heard about him.
He runs Palantir, which is it's basically government surveillance equipment, but like I said, he funded J.D. Vance's political career out of nowhere for no reason. Well, we don't really know what the reason was, but no obvious reason to us. And I don't know.
Yeah, I've heard of that. And let me just, I'm just going to be very open with you. So J.D. Vance, as I mentioned, his new book, Communion, just came out about a month ago. And I believe it's on page 204. He refers in that book to the blue laws, which are Sunday laws, and that basically, the state needs to be protecting Sunday for the benefit of the family, and for the benefit of our morals, and for the benefit of people being allowed to go to church, or not being forced to work, but they should be going to church. And what J.D. Vance, I don't know if he really realizes this, but he's Catholic, so that is a very Catholic principle. And if you do a study in history, the Ten Commandments teach, the fourth commandment says the seventh day is the Sabbath, and the seventh day is Saturday. Jews used to keep that, at least if they're religious. Jesus kept the Sabbath. I am a Sabbath keeper, and I look at the history of the Catholic Church, and they are the ones that basically changed the biblical seventh-day Sabbath into the first day of the week, into Sunday. And they claim it as a mark of their authority in religion. And they had their blue laws during the Dark Ages, and England had them, and the colonies had them. Almost every colony in early America, they had strict blue laws. And I believe that Revelation 13 is predicting that these laws are going to be reinstituted. That's when America is going to speak as a dragon, and it's going to force people to go along with a day that really comes from the Catholic Church. And there's a whole movement these days called Christian nationalism. I don't know if you've heard of it,
Yeah.
but Christian nationalists are basically saying America's in trouble. We need to come back to God. We need to reinstitute the blue laws and enforce God's law upon the people of America against blasphemy, against idolatry, and against Sabbath breaking. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to bring us back to colonial America and back to Europe, back to the Dark Ages. And I'm totally opposed to all that.
Yeah.
I believe in freedom of conscience. I believe in the principles of our government, in the Constitution and in the Bill of Rights. And that Sunday goes back to Rome. And the language of Revelation 13 basically refers to that day as the mark of the authority of the Roman Church. And prophecy predicts that America is eventually going to enforce the authority of the Roman Church, and you won't be able to buy or sell unless you go along with it. So I believe that there's what's called Sunday laws that are coming, and they're being discussed right now in many places. And I wrote a book about this called The Truth About the Sabbath, about the seventh day. And my book on The Light at the End documents what happened in Europe, what's happening in America, what's coming. And the principle of my book is basically that we need to follow Jesus and by his grace, keep his 10 commandments, which is his will for humanity, and that government has no right to enforce, one day or the other day, infant baptism or baptism by immersion. It's just not the role of government. And unfortunately, I don't think J.D. Vance sees that. So you talk about conspiracy. I don't know why Peter Thiel has decided to bankroll J.D. Vance's campaign, but it's ominous in the light of our history and religious freedom and all the blood that was shed in Europe and in England and colonial America. And that blood was shed because religious people used the state to enforce their will. And America is our core Bill of Rights says, don't do that. Congress is not allowed to pass a law to establish religion or prohibit the free exercise thereof. That's what the Bill of Rights says. And that principle goes back to Jesus, where he said, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's. That's a principle of Jesus himself.
Going back to the work now, am I hearing what you're saying, that you still worship the Sabbath on Saturday?
Correct. That's
Okay.
right. That's the biblical day. So in Genesis, it says God made the world in 6 days and he rested on the seventh day. The 10 Commandments, the fourth commandment says the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord. When Jesus was here on earth, he said, I'm Lord of the Sabbath. And he was in the synagogue on the Sabbath. And he died on Friday. He was buried. He rested in the tomb on the Sabbath, and he rose from the dead on the first day of the week. And the Catholic Church basically says, since Jesus rose on the first day of the week, that's the day we should be keeping. And they changed it to the first day of the week. But Jesus didn't say that. The Bible doesn't say that. That's Rome's idea. And today, unfortunately, the majority of people around the world keep the first day of the week as a sacred day, but it's not biblical. You won't find that in the teachings of Jesus. In fact, he never mentioned the first day of the week even one time, not once. So I believe God is calling us back to his law, back to his word. And in Revelation 14, in the context of the mark of the beast, it says in 14:12, here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. So God is calling people to follow Jesus, to follow the Bible, to keep the 10 Commandments, and I believe to keep the original Sabbath, not the one that has been changed by Rome, by the Roman Catholic Church, and that has persecuted people throughout history. Was
that Constantine that changed the Sabbath, or am I wrong?
Well, Constantine didn't change it, but Constantine, so the first 300 years of Christian history, Christians were persecuted by the Roman Empire, by the Caesars, Caesar like Nero, Diocletian, Decius, And then Constantine came up at the beginning of the 4th century, and he ended the persecution. He started favoring Christianity, and then the church that was in Rome, because Constantine was a Roman emperor, and the church that was in Rome morphed into the Roman Catholic Church, and they told Constantine that you need to pass a Sunday law to try to bring everybody together. The pagans who worship the day of the sun, the Christians who worship on Sunday, which really was the Catholic Church's creation to do that. And so they pressured Constantine to enforce a Sunday law, and he did that. It was on March 21, or maybe it's March 7, 321 AD. March 7, 321 AD, Constantine passed the first Sunday law to try to bring his empire, the pagans and the Christians, together under his umbrella. And that was the beginning of the union of church and state. And then when Constantine moved east to Constantinople, where he removed the seat of his government, he pretty much gave over the authority to the Bishop of Rome. And as eventually the Caesars got lower and lower, the popes got higher and higher, and this union of church and state that started with Constantine continued during the Dark Ages. That's why we got into the Dark Ages. And so Constantine didn't actually change the day. The Roman Church changed the day. And they did that because they didn't want to be like the Jews, because the Jews were in 70 AD, the Romans made war with the Jews and destroyed Jerusalem. And so the Christians felt like, well, we don't want to be like the Jews because the Romans at war with the Jews. And then as the Roman Church got stronger and stronger, they said, we're going to change the day from Sabbath to Sunday because we don't want to be like the Jews. Because the Jews, they said the Jews killed Jesus. That was their argument, and Jesus rose on Sunday. So they came up with all these reasons why we should switch. So it was really the Roman Church that made the switch. It wasn't Jesus, it wasn't Paul, it wasn't the disciples, it was the Roman Catholic Church. And the Roman Church influenced Constantine to pass a law which was to enforce their day, the Roman Catholic Church's day, Sunday. And that's how it started. And so, that's where Constantine comes in.
Okay. Yeah, it's really hard, and it's confusing because it's not in black and white anywhere, and people aren't going to pick up a Bible and read what day, and most people just don't understand what they're reading enough to put that together. And the other thing,
right. But it really is black and white in the 10 Commandments, because God wrote with his own finger on stone. The 4th commandment says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord. And then it says, in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and everything in it, and he rested the 7th day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and he hallowed it. So when you look at the 10 Commandments, it's very clear. But a lot of people don't know about history, but the Roman Catholic Church has come out. I've got a catechism right around the corner of my office where they come right out and they say, what day is the Sabbath? It's Saturday. Why do we keep Sunday? We keep it because we changed the day. So they come right out and say it in their catechisms.
But if you ask the average person on the street, what's the first day of the week? A lot of them are going to say Monday.
Yeah.
That's what they're telling us,
Yeah, I know. But if you look at a dictionary, what day is the 7th day? It's Saturday. If you look at encyclopedia, what day is the 7th day? It's Saturday. If you look at languages around the world now, in America, in English, it's Saturday. But I don't know if you speak Spanish. Do you know any Spanish?
Very little.
So I don't know if you know how do you say Saturday in Spanish? It's sábado. And how do you say Saturday in Russian? It's subota, which means Sabbath. And if you look at languages around the world, the day that they call Saturday is Sabbath. So the Sabbath is in the Bible. It's in the teachings of Jesus. It's in the 10 Commandments. It's in languages. It's in the dictionary. It's in the encyclopedia. And there are some calendars that are switching over where the 7th day is Sunday. And that's why you said Monday they think is the first day of the week. But that's a new invention. The Bible is very clear that Jesus rose on the first day of the week, so which is Sunday. So how can Sunday be the seventh day when Sunday is biblically the first day of the week when Jesus arose? So biblically, and for thousands of years, the calendar basically is that, Sunday is the first day of the week, Monday is the second day, Tuesday is the third day, Wednesday is the fourth day, Thursday is the fifth day, Friday is the sixth day, the day that Jesus died, right before the Sabbath came. And then the seventh day, the day that he was in the tomb, that's Saturday. And he rose from the dead on the first day of the week, which Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in the Bible all say that the first day of the week comes after the seventh day Sabbath.
That's interesting. I think we're going by I think we're on the Rockefeller calendar these days.
Yeah.
I think that's what the problem is.
The problem is most people don't know the Bible. They don't know history. And you don't have to know all the history. And I've been studying this for many years because I see it as part of prophecy. But the main thing we need to know is the 10 Commandments that God wrote with his own finger, and that Jesus paid the price on the cross, paying the penalty for all the times we've broken the 10 Commandments. And then he rose from the dead. And he's able to forgive us. He longs to forgive us by his grace from all the 10 Commandment breaking we've ever done. He'll forgive us. And then his Holy Spirit will come into our lives and change us, and then lead us to a new life where we start keeping the commandments instead of breaking them. So instead of dishonoring our parents, we honor our father and mother. Instead of bowing down to idols, and the Catholic Church has a lot of idols, a lot of statues in the Catholic Church. And then we don't do that. And that we will, instead of murdering others or hating others, we love people. And we were faithful to our spouses. That's where don't commit adultery. And we don't steal from other people. We don't lie. We tell the truth, which is what the 9th commandment says, don't bear false witness. And we don't covet the things that belong to our neighbor. And the law of God is summarized in 2 principles: love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And that's really, to boil it down, that's what God's desire for us is. And that's why Jesus came, is to forgive us for our sins, pay the price for our sins, and show us his love and change us so we love him and we love others. And that's the bottom line. And should be no force in that, because God doesn't force us to obey, to follow him. It's our choice. And government should never force religion, but that's what happened in Europe, in England, in colonial America. And that's what the devil is trying to do in the future, is get America to speak like a dragon and to use force. And unfortunately, this has been the bloody history of Rome from the very beginning.
All right. I didn't want to keep you too long.
It's all right.
I got a million more questions. Maybe you can come back another time in the future.
That sounds great. That
Yeah.
sounds great, Joe. Just send me an email. I think that you have my email because we've communicated a little bit. Send me an email and say, hey, I want you back. Let's talk some more. I'm happy to do it. And normally I don't cover all these things on podcasts, especially with someone that I've never met. This is our first time together, but
Right.
You asked me and I thought, well, let's just get into it. And I'm just going to tell you what I believe. And like I said, my books go into more detail. The Light at the End, The United States in Bible Prophecy, The Truth About the Sabbath. I can support what I'm saying with the Bible and with history.
And where do people find those books?
They can get them on our website, whitehorsemedia.com, whitehorsemedia.com. They can, if they go onto the website, they can order in our store, or they can call us. We have a toll-free number, 800-78-BIBLE, 800-78-BIBLE. We have a YouTube channel. They can find us on YouTube. Just type in White Horse Media, and they'll find us. We got a lot of programs on our channel.
Okay. And everybody go subscribe to the podcast too, White Horse Media. I just subscribed the other day. So I'll be listening to you and we'll talk again. Do you have a link tree or anything? Or I got the one link in the email. That's probably good enough. But if you have a link tree.
I mean, I think I'm on LinkedIn, but I don't really focus a lot on LinkedIn. I mainly just direct people to our website.
Okay.
whitehorsemedia.com and our YouTube channel where we have a lot of our programs.
Okay. All right. I'll put it in the show notes and looking forward to talk to you again.
Sure. Yeah. We also have a Bible school too. It's free, whitehorsemediabibleschool.com. And that doesn't cost anything.
Is that like once a week or?
No, what it is it's a video series filmed in Israel. It's a beautiful series, half hour, 26 half hour programs. So they just go, they sign up with their email address, no cost. And then they watch the first program and there's a Bible study below it. And then they click and they go to the next number 2 video and they watch it. And then there's a Bible study below. And they can ask questions to people that are in charge of our Bible school. And they just work their way at their own pace through 26 half-hour programs at their own leisure, their own pace. And they will learn a lot about Jesus and the Bible.
All right. That sounds good. I'm going to check into that too.
Awesome.
All right.
And if you're good with this, Joe, when you get this edited, if you could send me a link, we'd like to put this on our YouTube channel as well.
Yeah, I'll do that. Like I said, I'll probably put it out tomorrow, but I'll definitely send you something in the email.
Great. Wonderful. And I appreciate our time. This has been great. And I'd love to come back and talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah, we barely it's just the tip of the iceberg, man. You got all kinds of information.
Yep.
Looking forward to the next time.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Thank you again, Mr. Wohlberg. I'll see you next time.
Okay, Mr. Fox, looking forward to it next time.
All right.
God bless.